Dear listeners, welcome back to Life Talks. We're glad that you're with us once again. And today, we're excited. I'm personally excited, and it's an honor for me to introduce our new speaker, our person that we're going to have this discussion with, Russell Korets. And with this introduction, I could keep a very long introduction who he is, but I think in our local, not even in our local, but in our Slavic communities in America, you're a well-known figure. People know who you are. And through this interview, we're going to talk about your life, talk about what God has done through your life, and slowly, you guys will get to know more of who Russell Korets is and what God has done in his life. So Russell, welcome to our church. Welcome to our conference. We thank you that you're with us today. We thank you that you've accepted this invite. It's a pleasure for us to be here with you. And let's start off with the simplest questions. Let's start off with something easy, so nobody's nervous, nobody's panicking. Let's start off with something easy. So Russell, we know you as a speaker, we know you as a preacher, we know you as a pastor, but let's start off with everything, where it all started. Tell us about your youth, your childhood, how you grew up, your family, your childhood experience, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. You guys are an incredible team here. I'm jealous. What a setup and what incredible work that you guys are doing. I follow your church. I subscribe to you on YouTube, and just always blessed by what you guys do. I was born in Ukraine. I was born in a very godly family. My grandpa was a pastor, and my family I grew up, was taught the fear of the Lord, and we lived in Ukraine, Western Ukraine, 7 kilometers from Poland. And we immigrated to the United States when I was 9 years old. Mm-hmm. So I went to first grade in Ukraine, learned to read and write, and then we immigrated here in America. And grew up here in the Federal Way area, Federal Way, Washington, an incredible church called Slavic Gospel Church. Was there for many years. My dad was one of the deacons in the church and was a Sunday school director. And so early on, I started to help with setting up chairs and breaking down chairs for Sunday school. And then when I was a teenager, got involved in youth ministries, small groups, and early on got involved in leadership of our youth at the Church of Slavic Gospel. And when I was 18 years old, I became the youth leader at the church. Pastor Alex Kalchik passed on the youth ministry to me. And
it's pretty late, 18 years old, it's pretty late.
Yeah. And did that for 5 years. At the same time, I was heavily involved in a ministry called Good Samaritan with Paul Ratchuk, Grandpa Ratchuk, and Peter Ratchuk. And so we would do Bible schools here in Seattle and do a lot of mission trip overseas. And so I was involved in that for about 8 years, really heavily. And then I got married. I got married to your cousin and to the Hachai family. So Tanya Hachai, we got married. And a couple months into our marriage, we bought a house and we thought we'd be here, but just felt unsettled in that we knew eventually we'd like to reach the America as a mission field. We traveled around the world. We've seen the mission field, and the more we traveled, the more we realized America is our mission field. And so a couple months into our marriage, we sold our house and we moved to Oklahoma. And I went to a Bible college called Oral Roberts University, and I got my bachelor's degree there in ministry. I also worked in an American church there as a youth pastor. And so really kind of disconnected completely from the Slavic community, and for a number of years was just in the American community there. And while we were there, things came. Slavic Gospel Church at some point came to us to a split, and we just had a number of friends who disengaged from church, and we just felt a need to come back to Seattle and to plant a church. And so that's where sort of we moved back to Seattle, and life went on from there. But that's a little bit of our story. Today, I'm married, happily married. I'm my wife, Tanya, and we have 4 kids. Our oldest is 13, our youngest is 5. I'm still in college. I'm finishing up actually my master's degree here this year, master's in apologetics from Biola University.
Yeah, it's amazing that you said you guys have 4 kids, and it's amazing to always see you. Whenever you go to conference or events, I see you with your children. It's amazing that you bring them. Even today at this conference, you brought 2 of your kids, so that's pretty amazing to see a minister, because there's a lot of questions. I just want to focus on that. When we're talking about ministers, how do you balance ministry and family and life? this is pretty much how you do it. You bring the kids when you're going to a conference, you bring the kids. So that's an amazing to see, an amazing example. Thank you for sharing all the information, but let's bring it back to how were you raised? Because you started talking about your grandpa was a pastor, your dad was a minister, a deacon at SGC, and you started talking about how you started joining ministry and started flowing into the ministry that you were doing. Where did it all start? Did you have an epiphany moment where like something personal to your life? Because obviously we as Christians, a lot of our Slavic community, we grow up in our Christian families, which is a blessing. We're blessed by that. But where was that personal moment in your life where something happened within your heart, between you and God, between you and Jesus, that you said, hey, ministry is where I want to go and this is what I want to do? Where did you get that work ethic to start doing ministry?
Yeah. When I reflect on that, the thing that comes to mind, different people have different stories. Yeah. Some will go through a backsliding season and rebellion. My story is unique in that I've always been blessed by some amazing role models that have made a great impact in my life. Yevgeny Gerasimov, Grandpa Ratchuk, Paul Ratchuk. In different seasons, different people just had this powerful impact on me that I would observe their lives and how they served in the church, and even my dad. Watching him come to church every Sunday 2 hours early, setting up chairs in all the classrooms, always leaving last. Seeing that servant leadership, really, I was drawn to that. I was drawn to servant leadership, seeing it in action, that I think that it captivated my heart and really marked me significantly. So I'm just a result or a fruit of just a lot of godly people who had an impact on me.
That's amazing. That's amazing because we recently, our church is starting yesterday I was at one of our church's events, and we were focusing on starting a greeters ministry in our church, and some of the people shared their testimony, how they kind of stuck around our church and kind of transferred to our church or started getting involved in our church because of people just reaching out to them, saying hi to them at church, started talking to them and kind of building that relationship. And that's amazing to hear that. Your testimony is the fact that these people were around you and you were influenced by their lifestyles, by how they were serving God. And this is just another fact to me that, hey, these relationships actually do impact people. It's not just, it's us, what we could do in other people's lives. But do you mind sharing a little bit more about those role models in your life and how they impacted you, and kind of expand a little bit more on that? Because right now it's very popular in our youth communities to talk about role models, father figures, and how that works. And it seems like you had a lot of that. Can you share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think the role models that impacted me were just what they did, not so much from the stage, but for example, I remember my first sermon, Zhenya Gerasimov, he's part of Life Church here. He helped me craft that sermon, the title and the examples, and afterwards talk through that sermon and how it went. And it was those steps that really made me fall in love with preaching, more expository, preaching messages that weren't just last minute kind of spur of the moment. And so them taking extra steps like that. I remember Paul Ratchuk, service would end, everybody would be leaving, and we'd gather in some room praying for people. I remember, praying and casting out demons, as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, where it's like, you'd never see this in a Sunday service. But after service, he's like, oh, let's go with us. Let's go with us, and we're going to pray for people. And then I'd come to his house, and he'd gather all his kids in a circle and pray for them in the evening. And seeing that type of lifestyle outside of the pulpit, just really, I fell in love with that. And it's that type of discipleship marked me.
It's beautiful. I see that you're doing that already with your children, but bringing them along with you. That's amazing to see. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. You're around these people that were in ministry, preaching, preachers, evangelists, pastors. Did you see yourself in ministry, or did it kind of naturally pass along? Because obviously, whoever we're around, we kind of strive or look forward, look up to them, and kind of become who they are in some ways. We become like them. So how did that happen to you? Did you view yourself as a preacher, or did you have ministry ambitions, or how did that begin with you? How did you enter ministry?
Yeah, I think that seeing them and then seeing the fruit of ministry is what drew me into ministry. Seeing life change are so beautiful. When you see people's lives impacted by what ministry does, I didn't want to do anything else, because that's just the greatest change that happens. And so through the years of just plowing, and then all of a sudden you see the fruit, it's like, man, I want nothing else but this fruit. It's like you planting your own tomatoes, right, and getting the fruit, or maybe going to the market and seeing tomatoes. Once you plant your own tomatoes and see how delicious it is, it's like, let's do this again, And so for me, that was what drew me in early. I knew I wanted to be in ministry really early on. Certainly, I've always considered different careers, and school's always been easy for me. My dad at times would consider like, hey, maybe try it, something else. How are you going to pay your bills? But I just felt really a big call into ministry, and so I've been in full-time ministry now for 20 years.
20 years. Yeah. Congratulations. You're staying strong. Good to see that you're still in ministry. That's amazing. Beautiful example with the tomatoes. Today at work, we come to work in the morning. My brother comes from his van, gives me a box of tomatoes. Like, hey, this is fresh from the garden, because he has a garden. So that's a beautiful example. Yeah, he was very proud of that. This all started at a young age for you when you started preaching and when you started doing ministry. It's amazing to see. Can you start with, you started being a youth pastor, youth leader at SGC at 18 years old. How did that begin? Can you walk us through that? And how did you officially start doing ministry? And tell us about your life when you started doing that.
Yeah, I was surprised, because at that age, it was SGC at that time was a very large church, 1,200 members, 1,000 kids, 300 youth. So I was very surprised that I became the youth leader. But I think, the church leaders just kind of saw, hey, there's consistency here. We know him. We know his dad. We know his grandpa, right? And we had a good team around me, Micah Chai, others, it just wasn't just me. And so it was good years. Honestly, if I can be honest, I think I was put into this too early. Now looking back from the perspective, now as I'm a pastor who has a youth leader or youth ministry, I think we made some mistakes, and part of it was probably we were too young to put in that position.
Are you willing to share some of the biggest mistakes, or some of the mistakes, not even biggest, some?
Yeah, for example, I think every church has a specific vision. Mm-hmm. I think the senior leadership have a vision. And I think if their vision is to go in one direction and you as a youth leader want to take it another direction, I think it's a little bit dishonoring. Maybe in the big picture of things, it's not wrong in terms of what you want to do, mm-hmm. but it's dishonoring to the leadership. So now it wasn't just that, this happened at SGC. It's a tension that's happening to this day in every church. It's like, well, do you sing this song or do you sing this song? Well, do you do it in English or do it in Ukrainian? And I think sometimes we were too young and too eager to just kind of go fast. When looking back at it, I think that I wish we would have gone a little slower. To have honored the senior leadership of the church. I've always in good relationship with Pastor Sergio Maronyuk, and to this day in a very good relationship. But sometimes I wonder if I caused too many headaches by just sometimes, trying things that we were too eager to try. Later on in life, we had those opportunities to try all kinds of stuff, and yeah.
Okay. How long did you serve as a youth leader at SGC?
Yeah, so as a youth leader there exactly for 5 years.
Exactly 5 years. Mm-hmm. What was next in your life?
Yeah, so then we packed up and moved to Oklahoma. And while in Oklahoma, we were there for 4 years.
Why'd you make that decision to fully disengage from the Slavic community and get involved in an American community like that?
Well, I knew I wanted to go to Bible college, and I was married already. And Seattle, wanted to go to a Bible college that was reputable, where I could just really focus on that. And I knew if I'd stay here, it'd be too hard, because there's just temptation to continue to do a lot of ministry and work and family and everything else while I wanted a season to just get away and just study. And so Oklahoma, Oral Roberts University, is just had a high reputation around the globe, as a great university. And so, and Oklahoma was going to be a little cheaper to live. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that we chose as we looked at a couple different options. It was a blessing because we had just got married, and so it gave us an opportunity, me and my wife, to really bond, but also dedicate those years to study. And while in Oklahoma, I was looking for a part-time job, and an opportunity came to work at a church as a youth pastor. And so that was incredible because I got to really experience a much smaller church setting, but it was an American community, and so that was a valuable experience for me, coming from just a completely Slavic church.
So you were already 23 when you moved to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
What was your biggest thing that you learned from that experience, from being a youth pastor at an American community, an American church?
Oh, there's a number. I think the big takeaway for me was that, you grew up with this idea that the Slavic church is right and the American church is wrong. Mm-hmm. And through me in that season, I learned that there are good things in the Slavic church and there are bad things in the Slavic church. There are good things in the American church and there are bad things in the American church. And so for me, that was just a moment to say, to learn that God uses all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. And that we're going to need all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. I think it's a problem when we try to make every church look the same. We shouldn't. And I think that every church has its purpose and use, and ethnic churches have a purpose, as well. And so that was just really a maturing season that I saw good things and bad things in both of the communities. And instead of being like, I'm anti-Slavic or I'm anti-American, it's like, no, there's good people everywhere. And I met some really good people, God-fearing people, and I met some, even in the Bible Belt of Oklahoma, there's a lot of drug addicts, and we pick people up on buses to church, and we'd be driving by, and it's like the kids would be coming with us to church while their parents are doing drugs, and in Bible Belt, Oklahoma. And it's like, wow, Oklahoma needs some missionaries too. Yes. So that was just a maturing season for me.
Yeah. How'd you make the decision getting back to Washington, and what happened there?
Yeah. So SGC came to a split. And
was this when you were already in Oklahoma, or
right when we were thinking about church planting? SGC came to a split, and so we began to. The other thing was in the Seattle time. So in the Seattle at that time, there's a Mars Hill was blowing up. The issue of Calvinism was a big debate. And
who was the youth pastor, youth leader at SGC at that moment?
So Mike Kachai for a season, and then he passed it on to Olis.
Okay.
So when we moved back, Olis was the youth pastor,
okay.
Kind of around that time. Mm-hmm. But we began to talk with some friends, and we realized, hey, we have a lot of friends that are not in church. And I think there were two extremes at that time. There was very, very traditional churches, Slavic churches, and then very, very charismatic churches.
Yes.
And there was just sort of, nothing in between. We wanted, you can go one church and they preach against the charismatics, and you go to the charismatics and they preach against the traditional people. And we wanted to establish a church where we're going to honor our past, we're going to love our mentors, we're going to love and see the good in that. But at the same time, we want to reach our community. And so it just felt like there was a need in our region. And so we began to talk with some friends. We started with 4 friends, and we met with our parents and said, hey, we're thinking about church planting. And at that time, we were 26, all 26.
That's just amazing.
And our parents were like, no, go back to the drawing table. You can't start a church when you're 26. And so that's when we called Pastor Vasiliy. Okay. And we had a team.
I'm sorry, do you mind sharing who are the 4 families or 4 people that you got started talking about this? Yeah,
so it was me, Mike Kachai, Andrew Muzichuk, and in that time, Alice Kovalchuk was a part of our team. Okay. Then later on, we had Sergey Smile, but a couple others. But it was just kind of our initial 4. Mm-hmm. And then when we started, Alice Kovalchuk decided to stay with SGC, and eventually church planted as well. But we spent about a year and a half praying, fasting, calling each other regularly. And then at one point we called Pastor Vasiliy Botsyan and we said, listen, we have a team here. At that time, our team began to grow. And we knew we had about 100 people. And we called him and said, listen, we're going to...
I'm sorry, I'm listening to your information. I have 3 questions that I want to point out. You spoke about honoring those above us leadership. So your parents were kind of like, guys, you're too young. How did you deal with that? Second, what was your relationship with Vasiliy Botsyan? Because he was a pastor and bishop in Russia, if I'm not mistaken. And then third, how did you start building the team? How did the team start getting together? How did that happen?
Yeah.
If you could focus on some of those questions.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if they're a little bit too hard.
Yeah. Too many questions at once, and I
So you started reaching out to Vasiliy Botsyan.
Yeah. We knew Pastor Vasiliy because, one, I went to Russia, and I got to see his ministry there. Plus, we would invite him regularly to Seattle to teach in a Bible school that we would lead, youth ministry camps and stuff like that. So we really got to know him that way.
So he was a well-known figure here, and he was already working with a lot of the
so we knew him that way. And then question about parents.
Well, you started reaching out to him because you guys already had a team working and a team already building up to start a church.
Yeah. Yeah. So afterwards, what we began to do is, I was still living in Oklahoma. We set up weekly calls with the 4 of us. And so we would call each other up every week and spend a couple hours. I'd fly in a couple times. We'd meet. And this is where we began to pray about our name, our vision, our direction. And certainly at that time, people began to hear some of the rumors and call us and ask. And so when people would ask, we would just say, hey, this is what our plans were. At some point, we began to talk to Pastor Vasiliy. And so, you know, he was wrestling between a couple different areas to move to as well. And as he made it known, okay, we're going to try to get refugee status to move. The team, you know, began to grow and get bigger. We moved from Oklahoma in March. We started prayer services in April. Pastor Vasiliy came in May. So we started even to meet for prayer before he came. But this was about 12 years ago.
12 years ago. So continue on with that story. That sounds like a beautiful story. It sounds like everything's happening right in order.
Yeah, so Pastor Vasiliy moved here. Our team grew. We started to meet Sunday nights. And certainly, initially, it wasn't a church planting. We didn't split a church, but it wasn't a normal church plant. We had hundreds of people show up. You know, within a couple months, we had 500 people come in on Sunday. So we were blessed to find a great facility, Overcomer Covenant Church. Pastor Gordon found a space and, you know, held a grand opening. And so within a very short time, our facility was packed. It stayed that way for a number of months and years. And we began to see a lot of people driving from north, from Everett to us. And so about a year and a half in, we said, well, if we want these people to continue to be engaged with City Hill, we need to do something where they live. And so we had a crazy idea, why not try a youth service or maybe a gathering up north? And so we did a service about 2 years into, we launched the first campus 2 years in. We did a service, a trial service up north, 200 people came. And so we sort of, picked any, mini, money, mo who's going to move to the north, and it fell on me. So I went to my wife. I said, honey, what do you think about moving north, to start a new campus? And we had just moved from Oklahoma, and she's loving family nearby. And she's like, well, if I get to choose the house, then we can move. And she was working up north. And so we ended up moving up north, and we started regular services with just a number of families. I remember Sundays we'd meet with 40, 50 people up north. And then that campus just began to grow. So that was our second campus. About 2 or 3 years into the second campus, we were able to buy a facility up north. And shortly afterwards, our facility started to feel a little bit crowded. And so we said, well, why not start sort of a third campus, which is our first English campus. And so 3 years into the north, we started an English campus there in Kenmore. At some point, then our main campus here in Federal Way split into two campuses, a Slavic and an English. And then a couple years into that, we helped start our Bellevue campus as well. So it's directly involved in, in several of those launches, indirectly involved in here in Federal Way as it was starting, in Bellevue a bit. So I was just with City Hill.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of work that you guys were doing. How long did you stay at City Hill?
So it's 10 years.
10 years, and how many different services or different churches you guys started with City Hill, different branches?
Yeah, so 5. At
5.
that point, when I was leaving, we had so about 2,000 people on a Sunday, 5 different locations. Typically on a Sunday, I would be at 3 services on a Sunday because of the different campuses.
Are you willing to speak a little bit more about your experience at City Hill? What did you learn? Because obviously, I think you guys experienced starting different churches at a rate that I don't know if anybody else has experienced in our Slavic community. You guys started different locations, all in the same area. Tell us more what you learned at that speed, opening up that many churches. What was your experience like?
Yeah, it was wonderful. I don't think we planned on it. It's something that we just kind of naturally, we saw a need and we just took it. One of the things I learned is that I don't have to be there for things to be well. When I moved, when we started initially here, we thought, well, we gotta be here. And then I moved up north and things are well here without me. It's like, oh wait, that's great, And so I learned early that you can't build things on one person. If you do, you're sort of limiting yourself and God and what He can do through others. And so we began to see that hey, regular people can actually step up and lead, and God can use them. And that was a valuable lesson that I think inspired us to plant even more. Certainly, I think because we were one of the first ones in the Slavic community doing campuses, at times we didn't know what we were doing, and it caused some, well, who makes that final decision? When you're buying a building and when you're doing some things, does this campus make that decision or does this campus? And so it created some moments of tension, but tension happens in every church and it happens in every relationship. I think for me, the hardest moment was sort of the idea in terms of vision. Are we going to be centered on reaching the Slavic community? Are we going to be centered on reaching the community at large? And I think that the hardest moment for me came when City Hill at one point said, we're moving too fast and reaching the community. Let's slow down. We can get there a decade later. And I think in that moment I said, okay, Lord, this next decade, what am I going to give myself to? And at the end of this decade, will I stand before you and say, Lord, we've helped reach some more people from one church to another, and picked up some kids along the way who were heathen, or was I faithful fully in my gifts that I've been gifted with, reaching the community at large? And so I think in that tension, in that wrestle, City Hill at some point probably said, Russell, you're making us uncomfortable with what you want to do in terms of reaching the community. Why don't you you've planted a couple campuses, why don't you go plant again somewhere and just let us have everything that we've got? And I agreed.
You agreed.
And so they sent me out, and my house still mortgaged the church buildings for a while, guaranteed the church buildings for a while.
Wow.
But I'm grateful for my experience, for the learning. City Hill has a lot of good people. And just like any church, every church is going to have pluses and minuses. And wherever there's people, there's going to be some things, especially when you're doing things at a fast pace. There's going to be some pain. But I don't want to focus on that. I'm blessed that we had that season. I wish it ended differently, but it was a beautiful season in my life.
I really appreciate your honesty, and I really hope that anybody that's going to be listening to this will appreciate how real and how honest you're getting about this topic, which I know is probably not the easiest and not the softest topic for you. Some of the things we wanted to discuss is a minister's life. we may have a perception, you know, churchgoers sitting at a pew, row 7, 10, 12, whatever row we are. We have some certain ideas and perceptions of ministers, and it's honestly sometimes hard, or maybe we don't even want to understand their life. So that's what I want to question and maybe focus on this. Talk about a minister's life while we're talking about your ministry and everything that's going on. Highs and lows, obviously they exist. It's like even in a minister's life, how do you get through that? Like how do you manage that? Do they exist, or does everything run smoothly? And a person decides to, hey, from 18 years old, I want to serve God. I want to dedicate my life to ministry because I don't think anything else is worth it. Like, it sounds like, hey, you made a decision to serve God. Everything should be good for you. You're serving God. Everything should run smoothly for you. How does that honestly work in your life? What's the reality for people that get fired up at a youth conference? They get fired up at an event. What's the reality of a Christian life, especially if you want to serve? Because I think those moments where we don't focus on it, we don't see the reality, kind of throw us off course, and it's sometimes hard to get up and continue walking that direction. What are some challenges, or how did you deal with the challenges in your life as a minister, as a preacher, as a pastor, as a father? How did you deal with all that?
Yeah. Well, we've been called to follow Jesus, and Jesus' life ended with crucifixion, and his disciples, most of them died, persecuted. So the people that went before us certainly experienced a lot of joy and a lot of peace, but also persecution and hardships. Ministry is beautiful and wonderful, but it also has its hardships. And sometimes my wife and I, we have this conversation: should we encourage our kids into ministry or not? Like maybe we shouldn't, unless they themselves decide to go into it. You know, people will have their difficult days, and sometimes one of the hard things in ministry is sometimes you'll invest into somebody for so many years. I remember this one young man, I invested into him so much. Sundays, we would drive to church separately with my family, because I drive out of my way to pick him up 30 minutes. And then after service, drop him off. I mean, every Sunday, my family were split up driving to 2 cars because we're picking up this young man. And then one time I couldn't do something for him, and he got so upset, went to social media and posted like, oh, Russell is, you know, he doesn't want to serve people, and he doesn't, you know, he just wants to relax. And it's like, brother, what I've been doing for the last 2 years. Like, just one time I couldn't take you to the mall. All of a sudden, you publicly do this. And that's people, you know. Sometimes you will do things and serve, and ministry too. It's just, you will give and you give and you give. At the end of it all, you can end up with not much. And but you still do it anyways, because you're doing it for ultimately to hear, good and faithful servant from the Lord, knowing that our reward is not here on earth, but there in heaven. But the difficulty, I think, in ministry sometimes is self-caused too, in that you have to have some boundaries and what you say yes to. Because again, ministry will always take them, you know, whatever you give, it'll take everything. And so it's learning to say, okay, I can't do this anymore because of some greater values and greater priorities. So I think that the quicker you're able to learn to say no to some things, the easier ministry can get. Sometimes when people ask me to do certain things, I say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm actually serving another family that evening. They need help, and I'm serving them. They're like, oh, okay, you serve them. I don't tell them it's my family. I tell them it's a family that I have to serve. And then they're like, oh, okay, it's not an emergency anymore. Come next week. So I've had to learn to just sort of say it in a way that still prioritizes ministry, but also my family.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's amazing how you said that in the beginning when you were talking about what motivated you to get involved in this ministry, seeing the fruit. But sometimes that same situation could hurt you the most and create the biggest challenge, or overcoming. Like, hey, you're investing so much, but the fruit, something else is happening, a completely different reaction. So sometimes the things that are most important are usually the things that do hurt us the most. Yeah. So you served 10 years at City Hill. You guys did amazing things, and I think you guys were moving at a rate where, like you said earlier, no other Slavic community or no other Slavic church has been doing so. Obviously, there will be mistakes, there will be challenges, there will be things that you are learning and everybody else are learning on what you guys are doing. So that's amazing you guys went through that. 10 years at City Hill, what came next in your life?
Yeah. So when City Hill sort of made a decision, it's like, hey, let's go a different direction. And Russell, why don't you take a hike?
So I just want to clear this up. They made a decision to ask politely or...
Yeah, they made a decision. It's like, Russell, you can plant new campuses. Why don't you go plant a new campus? We're going to do things here on our own. And it was painful. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to the people I greeted, that were part of the church. But in that moment, there's George Davidyuk is one of the people that is very close to my heart. Flew in, cried on the shoulder for a while. And in that moment, Timberlake Church, which is a great church in our region, I knew them for a couple years and was learning from them. And even in this discussion about how do you reach the community, I'd always go to Pastor Ben Sigmund and sort of pick his mind on how to reach our region, because they're reaching our region. On Easter Sunday, they'll have over 8,000 people in person at Timberlake Church across their locations. So I know that they reach our region well, and I'd go to him from time to time and ask him questions. And during this transition, I reached out to him and said, hey, this is where things are. And he said, Russell, listen, it's on my heart. Can you join our team? And even for a year, even if you don't do anything, and just be here and rest up, we'll pay your salary. We want your family to be well, because there's a big need in our region to do more. And so you need to be rested. You need to be well. Would you come on the team here? And this is a God moment, because it gave me some time to rest, to learn again. It's just one of those, I know in my life, there's been seasons when you learn and then seasons you give back. And so this was a season to take a rest. Now, 2 months into it, they said, okay, you rested, why don't you take over our campuses? and then COVID came, and then, why don't you lead our outside services? And then why don't you plant a new campus? So at Timberlake, it was a very learning experience. I mean, you're talking about a church of thousands of people, a $10 million budget, and instead of working with hundreds of volunteers, you're working with 40 staff, and you're overseeing pastors in the work that they do, instead of just you doing all the work, and so it was a different season, very enriching. Just met some of the best people that I know today at Timberlake Church. Pastor Ben and the whole team, their staff, incredible. They're reaching people. I mean, we were baptizing hundreds of people coming from no church background, wow. And so I got to see that and in such a beautiful way, and just so grateful for my season at Timberlake. I was there for 2 years, and I was overseeing the campuses, and when you're overseeing staff, after a couple of years, I just felt like, okay, I'm ready to get out and do this again. I never thought I'd want to do church planting again. Wow. Because we planted with City Hill. I was directly involved with 4 campuses launching, helped plant a campus at Timberlake, and so you did it 5 times, like, I can't do this again. Mm-hmm. But I felt like my soul rested at Timberlake. I learned. And Timberlake, every year, they plant campuses, but also every year they plant churches in our region. Mm-hmm. And they've planted some great churches. And so they had a vision to plant 5 more churches that are not called Timberlake in the next 5 years. And so through that, I said, well, why not us be one of them? And I built a relationship with 7 families, 7 new families that I didn't know. Mm-hmm. That just came into our life through Timberlake and friends. And right when Pastor Ben is sharing the vision about planting 5 new churches, I get into this relationship with 7 families. It's with that in that time that I meet with Pastor Victor Procher. And I said, listen, life is good at Timberlake. I'm paid well, I'm treated well, amazing team, but I'm unsettled. And we have these 7 families. And he says, Russell, do you know that Life Church started with 7 families? And to me, that was like, okay, that was the word of the Lord.
Yep, that's our pastor. That's
And
amazing.
so he encouraged us. He said, listen, if you have 7 families, I think it's time. And so we met with the families and we said, what do you guys think? And we began to pray and met a couple times. And this year started Sunday morning services, a church called Woodmark Church in Kirkland, Washington.
Congratulations. It's good to have you back, Russ. So starting planning more churches.
Kirkland, see what also played a role in that. Kirkland has 100,000 people. If you go to every church in Kirkland on Sunday morning, there will be less than 3,000 people in person in church in Kirkland, Washington, out of 100,000 people. I mean, Federal Way, right? Mm-hmm. Federal Way has 90,000 people. If you go to all the Slavic churches only, on Sunday morning, there will be more than 10,000 Slavics in church on a Sunday morning in Federal Way.
Praise God for
Right?
that.
Pentecostal, Baptist. And in Kirkland, you go to all the churches combined, less than 3,000. And so Kirkland it just struck a chord. You know, it's like, okay, somebody needs to plant churches here. And so we're excited, and it's been an incredible journey. If you would have told me 8 months ago we'd be here today, I'd hug you and I'd cry because really 70% of the people that come to Woodmark today, I didn't know them 6 months ago or 8 months ago. These are new people, new relationships. We're reaching people from the community. And it's just been so incredible. The last 6 Sundays, every Sunday I meet somebody that says, hey, this is my first time ever in church.
Praise God.
And so when that's happening, I'm like, all right, let's buckle up for an exciting ride ahead.
That's amazing. I love hearing you speak and seeing the real examples of what you're saying, how you started off with having these mentors in your life that have influenced you. And this idea of mentorship, I see that theme throughout your whole life. Like even to this point, this last point you said, hey, we start off church by talking to a brother, Victor Semenovich, and he shared an idea. It's once again you talking to an older person, a bishop, and being mentored once again. So I love seeing this. And when you're going through your difficult period with City Hill, transitioning, you had once again that theme of having mentorship, having those other people influence you, having those other people come in and help you. That's just amazing to see. Can we focus a little bit on people that do go through difficulties in life? How important are those relationships? To have people around, to have people supporting. How important is that for life and for our Christian life? How important is that?
I'll say this. I think that people that don't have that don't heal properly and will probably carry the consequences of not having those people for the rest of their lives. Pain happens, right? Scars happen. And if you don't heal properly, there's going to be wounds. But when you have people that you can really open up and be raw with and cry with and share frustrations with, and sometimes I tell you in that season of transition, sometimes I was going to send a text message to others. I'd send it to George Davidiuk and be like, George, is this okay to say? Is the wording okay here? Or if sometimes I was tempted to post something on Facebook, I'd send it to George Davidiuk, like, George, are these okay? Am I sharing it? And you know, and his perspective, I think it allowed me to heal because it was a safe person that I can share anything with and know that he'd still love me. And so I think that true healing from wounds can really happen when you have people like that. If you don't, if you're going to do it by yourself, I think that's just, some will heal okay, but that's where some wounds can be lingering on for a long time.
I think that's a beautiful and practical example of us as a family, as a Christian family, body of Christ, carrying each other's burdens when we not just alone dealing with our own issues, but really dealing with our brothers and sisters. That's amazing. And I think I would encourage anybody going through any difficulties, personal life, ministry, any situation, to find those mentors. And this is a beautiful example. Thank you for sharing that. What number of church is this that you planted with Woodmark?
It's technically 6.
Technically 6.
Yeah.
Is there much more not technically?
Yeah. I do want this to be my last. Church planting is hard. It's hard on the family. It's hard on finances. It's hard on relationships because every time you start new, it's like you have to give yourself to new relationships but yet you have all these other relationships that you invested into. Church planting is really hard. And so we want this to be our last. But at the same time, we want to be involved in church planting heavily. And so we already have a church planter resident at Woodmark who's going to be planting a church coming up. And so we're going to do it differently in that he's with us, learning, being a part of all our meetings, and then at some point he's going to plant a church. And so we want to invest into church planters in that next phase of my life as I turn 40.
Turn 40. So you started, this is your sixth church, if I'm not mistaken, sixth church. After so many different experiences, so many different churches that you guys were involved in planting and starting, how was this different? Was it easier for you to start another church, having all that background, having all that information, having all that experience? What was different? How was it easier?
Yeah. I gotta say, because we've matured a little bit and older and we've done it a number of times, we sort of know what to expect. We just kind of carry it differently. Where before you'd wake up and you're tossed. It's like, is anybody gonna come? Is anybody gonna show up? And you're worried and you can't sleep. And with this one, I think that because we've sort of had the experience, we kind of know what takes time to develop. Like, oh, that's okay. We'll get there tomorrow. It doesn't have to all happen today. We don't have to do everything today. So it's kind of learned us to be a little bit more mature and knowing what to expect. And so what's different about this church plant than others is that we carry it differently. The other thing is that really the Lord has come from time to time and really assured us and like, hey, this is what you're doing is of me. And I think those moments are significant. I remember one of our first meetings, our dad came to our gathering and we had like 30 people in the service and he cried. It's like, Russell, are you sure you want to do this? Like you're at Timberlake where you have thousands of people. Like, why are you doing this? And I was discouraged, and the next day it was my birthday and my wife says, hey, listen, why don't you go to a coffee shop and just spend some time with the Lord, with the Word. And I go to a coffee shop and some man comes and sits beside me and starts singing. I'm like, okay, this doesn't happen in Kirkland. So I turn to him, it's like, hey, who are you? And he starts crying. He says, listen, the Lord sent me here today to tell you that what you're doing is of me. And even if people will discourage you and tell you, this is not it, the Lord has sent me to say that this is the right place and the right time, and what you're doing is of me. And so these kind of moments are like, okay, Lord, thank you. Thanks for your wink. Thanks for your assurance. Let's get back to it.
That's amazing. That's a beautiful encouragement. That's amazing to hear. Starting churches, you have all the experience. What does it really take? What does it take to plant a church, to start a church? Because we have a lot of passions, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of plans. But for anybody even thinking about these things, what does it really take? Maybe one or two things that really takes to plant or start a church.
Yeah. I would say three things. One is you definitely have to have a call of God to start. Otherwise, it's too hard. If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. You have to have a call of God. Second thing is you have to have a good team. It just takes so much. And I just got to say, we're so blessed at Woodmark. The families that came alongside initially, it's like we picked it up together. And so you have to have a team of people that are going to say, yes, we're on board. Even if nobody else shows up, we're going to have a good time. And that's what clicked for us when we had those 7 families. Like, even if nobody comes, we love each other. We want to be with each other. And so you have to have a good team. Then the third element is you have to have some good other pastors and sort of a network that's going to support you. When we planted Woodmark, we had a number of churches that gave significantly, local churches.
Praise God.
House of Bread gave us $20,000. There's a number of churches in the middle of construction and building projects send us money. And so certainly it takes money. And so the relationships that I had with a number of pastors really helped us get through that initial season. Now, the blessing is that Timberlake came to me when we were planting and said, Russell, we'll pay your salary for a number of months while you focus on the church plant. That was huge for me to have. But the other people that came alongside really helped us initially to get a good enough start because, you don't have giving right away. That comes with time. And so you need a little bit of an investment. And if you don't, it's just, you'll still get there, but it'll be slower.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that information, especially how other churches supported you guys and helped you, because oftentimes it's a tendency to kind of hear the negative things more often, how churches have some issues between churches. But thank you for sharing the positives, because that's so important.
Can I tell you, City Hill, Bellevue, Alex Kovalchuk, Living Hope, Eugene Terpai here. I mean, churches within 10, 15 minutes from us sent us money and said, listen, you do this. Pastor Alec Rollins, Westgate Chapel, called me one day and said, listen, Russell, I heard you're planting. Can you come this Sunday with your team? We want to pray for you guys. I mean, they're 15 minutes from us, you know, and so those kind of moments really surprise me. But at the same time, I think if you don't have that kind of support, you need to find it. It's out there, but you have to make sure you have it before you plant.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing. It's just, for me, it's a pleasure to hear how churches are behaving in such a proper way, where we're supporting one another as a family, as a body of Christ. It's just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And this service, this church that you guys planted, are full on English. You guys are reaching out to the American community, correct?
Yes.
So now you've been part of our Slavic community, Slavic churches. You've served in our Slavic churches. You've served, and then you've planted American churches, English services. What is the main difference? Can you compare anything? What can we learn from each of these services? And then the second question would be, what is the role of the Slavic church here in America?
Yeah, again, every church is going to have its pluses and minuses. The plus side of the Slavic communities, you have really strong family networks. And that's a plus side, because family will go so far with you. And so you have a rich heritage. You have people that walk with integrity. You have people that live out the gospel, right? And so that's beautiful. And so you have that side where the Western world, not just the American, but the Western world is very individualistic. People are they live in their own bubbles. They're not very much interconnected as much. And so the Slavic church's got that area, where the American communities, they're very, very welcoming to others, where the Slavic community is only welcoming to themselves. The American community is very welcoming to others, that they'll embrace anybody and everybody and welcome them into the team. And so, that's a big upside of that, of the community, very sacrificial, very giving, on both sides. So I think that you're going to have really good people too in the Slavic community and some evil people in the Slavic community. Same thing with American. I think the biggest thing that we have to remove this branding, Slavics, Americans, and just see it as people living in America. The quicker you can do that, the easier it becomes to reach the community at large. Now, I do think the Slavic church has a very significant role to play in the years to come. And I think it's the role of John the Baptist. John the Baptist said, hey, I must decrease, he must increase. That's our role. Like, how can we give birth to new leaders? How can we release leaders to reach our communities? How can we train leaders that will walk in the fear of the Lord, walk in integrity, at the same time reach beyond our four walls? I think that's the role of the Slavic church. And honestly, I think the Slavic church is doing that much better than the typical church in America. And that the number of leaders that they have raised up, it's just mind-blowing. You look at a Slavic Gospel Church, the number of pastors that have come out of Slavic Gospel Church, youth leaders, preachers. It's like, whoa, name me another church that's produced so many leaders. And so I think the Slavic church is doing it well. I think the only thing where they're missing is instead of seeing that as a success, they're seeing them as people not to bless and not to pray for, which was hard. I'll say this. I asked Slavic Gospel Church to pray for us as a church plant. And they said, Russell, just you guys do what you do and let us do what we do. And it was hard. I wept. I wept, and it's like, you guys, like you're, one of the people that grew up in your midst is planting a church to reach Kirkland. Like, why not celebrate that? So there's a role that the Slavic church plays, but I'm not sure if they're willing to embrace it.
Okay. Hearing you speak, is that what Church Momentum Collaborative is about? Is that what you guys are about? Because I know you started that organization, whatever, I don't know properly what it's called. What is all that about?
Yeah, Church Momentum Collaborative is we came together with a number of pastors from all over the U.S. These are ethnic pastors, pastors with an immigrant background, but they're planting community churches. There are now 78 Slavs who've planted English-speaking churches or English-speaking services in America. 78.
Praise God.
And what Church Momentum Collaborative is we found that a number of us were giving money to church plants that were part of great organizations, but yet there were ethnic leaders planting churches, and nobody was really supporting them. And so Church Momentum part of it was, hey, why not, instead of just sending our money to church planting through who knows who, why not take these same funds and give it to church planters with an ethnic background? And so the idea of Church Momentum is to come alongside the ethnic church planters, support them relationally, resources, finances, phone calls, and just encourage them in church planting. And so now we're investing over $100,000 a year into church plants, just through a core team, and we'd love to continue to expand that. So what we do is we come together regionally throughout the U.S. Throughout the year with those 78 pastors who've planted English churches, and we just encourage each other. And then we find those that are planting churches or planting English services, and we do an annual intensive where we really just dive in deep and talk about Google reviews and talk about your website and talk about planning center and talk about developing your team and talking about kids ministry and, just sharing all our resources. Hey, here's our membership class and here's what that looks like. Hey, here's our bylaws. Put your name on it and copy them and keep them. So really the idea of it is, it's not a denomination. We want to connect them to denominations, but we want to just resource ethnic church planters that are planting churches.
It's amazing to see that you guys are putting so much effort to support other people with visions, with ideas, with people that have a heart to serve, to start new churches. It's amazing to see you guys invest so much to help them out.
And here's the thing. Some of those churches are very different from each other. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a church planter in Sacramento planted from John MacArthur. You go to their service, they're singing hymns, right? Mm-hmm. The church's blowing up, 1,000 people, and then you go to another church and it's got lights and smoke, and like very different. The issue is not like, hey, we need to look this way or that way. Some have a Baptist background, some Pentecostal, some charismatic, right? So it's our right. We don't look at those differences. We just want to come alongside to encourage and give some resources, ideas how to reach the community at large.
Sometimes that is much needed. I'm glad to see that you guys are on top of it and doing such an amazing job. Thank you for sharing so much. It was a pleasure to hear you speak honestly, openly, and just open your heart and actually tell us your experiences, your life. And so other people hearing this may get encouraged through this, take something for themselves and go through whatever situation that they go through, kind of survive and move forward. Would you want to share a last message, few words for people listening, and some words of encouragement from you personally?
Yeah. Pray for Kirkland. Kirkland needs Jesus. Mm. I think I have a really heart for the local church. Jesus' plan for America is through the local church. So my message to you, love your local church. There's no perfect local church, right? If you're going to find the perfect local church, the moment you're going to join it, it'll become imperfect because you're not perfect. There is no perfect church. Join a local church, get involved, start serving. God uses all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. And some churches will do a much better job reaching one certain type of people, and another church will do a much better job reaching different kinds of people. So, get plugged into a church, find out the heartbeat of the church. Like, what are we really about? What do we do well? And get involved. Start serving. Start growing some tomatoes. And I'm telling you, the satisfaction of that would be so great. If you're just a spiritual tourist, sort of critical of everybody, critical of anybody. It's like, man, critics, it's a tough life to be a critic. Like, quit being a critic and just join the ranks. Start serving. Love your local church, and be a part of sort of movement of God, really utilizing Slavs in America to plant churches and English services to reach the communities around that. That's why I love NSD, and our church is part of NSD as well, in that we want to come alongside young men and women that are growing up in part of Slavic NSD churches, National Slavic District, in the future to help them start English services or even plant churches in some cities that don't have a lot of Christians. So excited about the future and just honored to be a small part of that.
Pastor Russell Korets, thank you so much for your time and for sharing. But before we let you go, we want to ask you 10 blitz questions.
Come on.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Favorite hobby?
Books.
Books. Favorite
Yes.
food?
So books and coffee.
Books and coffee. So that goes under food, just coffee.
Favorite food and favorite hobby all together. Books and coffee.
Perfect. Favorite book from the Bible?
2 Timothy. Last book Timothy wrote, Paul wrote and died afterwards, 2 Timothy.
Okay, favorite novel, not from the Bible, obviously.
Favorite novel.
Novel, or favorite book, let's go with that. Favorite novel or book, not from the Bible, since you like books so much.
Oh my goodness, give me the category and I'll tell you the book. Tale of Three Kings, I think is a book.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that. I've heard a lot about that. Let's go with favorite author then.
Oh my goodness. Timothy Keller, C.S. Lewis. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite place you have visited?
Favorite place I have visited? Kirkland, Washington.
That's good. That's smart. Favorite music genre?
Oh my goodness, George Davidiuk. How could I not like George Davidiuk?
That's his own genre, George Davidiuk.
I just, every season depends, right? Right now, I love Maverick City, but it changes. It changes with time.
Do you have any interest in sports? Any favorite sports team?
Seahawks. Yeah, I love sports. I get to watch about one game a year.
That's just enough, right? Okay, one thing that you're looking forward to in 2022.
I turned 40 years old this year, which is sort of scary.
And you're looking forward to that.
Which is scary. Yeah. I have to because it's going to happen. So that's a significant marker for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pastor Russell.
Thank you.
So
It was
much.
an honor to be with you guys.